I never imagined that at 66 years old, I would find myself standing at my kitchen table, staring down at a wedding invitation with my name crossed out in thick, angry black marker. The envelope, once delicately addressed in calligraphy, now looked like a personal indictment. Graham's handwriting, familiar, unmistakable, scrawled a bitter message across the ivory cardstock. If you can't support our future, don't expect to be part of its beginning. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the edge of the table for support, bile rising in my throat as a wave of disbelief crashed over me. Was this really my son? My only child? The boy I had raised with every fiber of my being after his father, Henry, died in the middle of a snowstorm 12 years ago? The same Graham whose fever I had broken with cool cloths through endless nights, who I had nursed through heartbreaks and homework, whose dreams I had funded with double shifts and missed holidays? I had stared at the invitation when it first arrived months ago with trembling joy, marveling at the elegant gold lettering and the embossed seal of Oakmere Estate. I had pinned it to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sun, an ironic choice, now that that same sun had gone out in my world. What had begun as a simple disagreement about money had twisted into this, a deliberate act of erasure. I felt not just excluded, but discarded. I thought of all the evenings I had spent nursing my sore back after long hours on my feet at the hospital, comforting myself with the thought that at least Graham would have a better future. I had skipped dinners, vacations, new clothes, so many small indulgences, all for him. And now, that same sun had crossed me out of his life with the stroke of a pen. The grief of that betrayal was physical. It settled into my chest like a stone, pressing against my lungs with every breath. I sank into the nearest chair, staring at the invitation as if it might morph back into what it once was, a symbol of family, of continuity. But it didn't. It only glared back at me, cruel and final. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in. I couldn't stop the images flooding my mind. Graham at age 5, chasing fireflies in the backyard, his father watching proudly from the porch swing. Graham at 12, winning the regional spelling bee, hugging me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Graham at 24, weeping quietly at his father's funeral, my arms wrapped around him like armor against the world. And now, this, a black line through my name, and a message that may as well have read, "You are no longer my mother." I let out a sound, something between a sob and a growl, that startled even me. It wasn't just sadness, it was rage. Deep, helpless rage at how little I seemed to matter, now that Sabrina Vale had him wrapped around her manicured fingers. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, it was the fear. Fear that maybe I had failed him, that maybe I hadn't raised him with enough strength to resist people like her. That maybe, just maybe, he believed the things she whispered in his ear, that I was selfish, old-fashioned, dead weight. My stomach twisted with anxiety. What else had she poisoned him against? Would I someday wake up to find the locks changed? Would he sell my home out from under me without blinking, just as he had tried to coax me into doing months ago? The house that Henry and I had built with hope and scraped savings, the home where Graham took his first steps and learned to ride his bike in the driveway, reduced to collateral in someone else's fantasy wedding. I was alone. That was the truth that pressed in hardest of all. My phone hadn't rung in days. My friends were kind, but busy with grandchildren and lives that still made sense. Even Beatrice, my closest friend, had gently suggested that maybe I had been too hard on Graham, too attached to the past. But how could I explain the ache of watching your child become a stranger? The ache of sitting at the kitchen table every morning with 2 mugs, still making his tea out of habit. The ache of walking past his childhood room, untouched since he left, now feeling more like a shrine than a space. I pressed my hand to my chest, struggling to keep myself from splintering. I wanted to scream, to burn the invitation to ash, to demand he look me in the eye, and explain how decades of love could be so easily overwritten. But there was no one to scream to, no one to listen. Just me and the ruined invitation, and the echoing silence of a house that suddenly felt far too large for a mother no one wanted. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, the mutilated invitation still face down on the table, like a wound I couldn't stop picking at, and tried to remember when exactly my son stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. The memories, once my solace, now turned on me, each one laced with a sorrow so sharp it cut through my skin. I thought back to the days when Graham's laughter echoed through this very house, when he'd pull at my apron strings and ask if the cookies were ready, or beg me to read just one more story before bed. Back then, this house felt alive, each creaking floorboard whispering the comfort of a life built through love and quiet persistence. I had been so sure that the boy who used to press dandelions into my palm and call them sunflowers for your heart would grow into a man who understood the weight of what I gave up to raise him. But now, as I relived those years, all I felt was grief. Grief for a son I had loved with every cell of my body, and for the version of myself who had believed that love alone would be enough. Henry and I had bought this house in our late 30s after nearly a decade of failed pregnancies and miscarriages that tore through my spirit like hail on spring buds. When Graham was born, our miracle child, we poured our entire beings into him. He was our sun and center, our second chance at something pure. I gave up on my own dreams without even realizing it, turned down an offer to head the nursing department at St. Agnes so I could be there for school pickups and science fairs and runny noses. I packed lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside, drove an hour out of my way for the violin lessons he swore he'd never quit, and spent nights on the living room floor next to his bed when fevers spiked or nightmares wouldn't let him sleep. After Henry died from that heart attack while changing the porch light, so sudden, so absurd in its cruelty, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Graham was 24 then, finishing his master's in architecture. He came home for the funeral in a tailored black suit and left 2 days later in silence, barely touching the envelope of cash I slipped into his suitcase. I worked double shifts at Mercy to keep him afloat so he wouldn't have to carry student debt. I told myself the distance was grief. I told myself he'd come back when it passed, but he didn't. As Graham's career took off, so did the space between us. His phone calls became less frequent, always hurried. His visits, once sweet and unannounced, became scheduled, calculated, often rescheduled at the last minute. And then came Sabrina Vale, with her sculpted nails and her designer scarves, and the way she looked around my modest bungalow like it was a museum of the unremarkable. The first time she visited, she complimented the quaintness of my home like it was an exhibit on poverty. I remember watching her cross her legs on my floral couch, eyes skimming the room as if cataloging what she'd have removed first. Her ring was the size of a grape, and when I said it was lovely, she smiled like she'd expected me to bow down and weep in awe. I saw the way she looked at Graham when he called me Mom, her lips tightening, her body pulling subtly away from him, and I saw the way he noticed. From that point forward, it was always Mother, in a tone that made me feel like a distant relative whose presence was merely tolerated. But the worst memory, the one that haunts me most, was the night they invited me to dinner at an overpriced French restaurant I couldn't afford. I wore my best dress and still felt invisible the moment I stepped into that world of clinking champagne flutes and manufactured laughter. That's when they told me they had booked the Oakmere estate for the wedding. Sabrina's father had pulled strings. It would be the wedding of the year, 5 courses, a world-renowned quartet, a honeymoon in the Maldives. And they needed my help. "We were thinking," Sabrina had said, fingers grazing my hand like a serpent coiling around prey. "You could sell the house. It's a wise move at your age. Sunny Glen retirement is lovely, and it would help us start life the right way." The shock had paralyzed me. They'd already researched the market value of my home, had brochures from the facility, the one they thought I belonged in. Graham sat beside her, silent, complicit, watching me shatter without lifting a finger. I walked out of that restaurant with my pride shredded and my hands trembling. I spent that night alone, wandering my house in the dark, touching every object Graham had once made sacred: the growth chart on the kitchen doorframe, the lopsided birdhouse we'd built together, the photo albums he hadn't looked at in years. I kept wondering what I'd done wrong, what I'd failed to teach him. And beneath all of that sorrow, a black river of rage pulsed through me, not just at him, but at myself. Because I had given so much, and now I didn't even recognize the man he had become. I still remember the clink of Sabrina's champagne flute hitting the edge of her plate when she leaned in, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes razor sharp. "We wanted to talk to you about something important, Marion." It was our third course, something unpronounceable with shaved truffles and foam, and I had been trying so hard to follow the rhythm of the dinner, to keep up with the conversation, to pretend I wasn't painfully out of place among the white linens and hushed conversations. My napkin, folded too neatly on my lap, was damp from where my trembling hands had pressed it into submission. Graham sat across from me, his posture impossibly straight in that fitted navy suit, the one I'd bought him when he'd landed his first client at the firm. But there was no warmth in his eyes tonight, no humor. Just an unsettling coolness that made me feel like I was sitting across from a stranger. "The Oakmere estate is confirmed," Sabrina said, swiping to a photo on her phone. "Daddy pulled a few strings. 2-year wait list. Can you believe that? The ceremony will be in the gardens, and we've secured a French violinist from New York. Only the best." She smiled wide, teeth perfectly white, as she passed me the phone to admire her curated vision. The image was breathtaking: manicured hedges, golden sunset lighting, a silk-draped archway in bloom. I nodded politely, murmuring that it looked beautiful, even as my stomach twisted in a knot I couldn't name. I couldn't yet see the blade hidden beneath all that beauty. "We want it to be perfect," she added. "A day no one will forget." And then Graham cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, using that formal word again, the one that landed like a slap. "We've been doing the math. Between the venue, the travel, the honeymoon villa in Bora Bora, and the penthouse we're moving into this fall, it's all moving very quickly." He gave a tight smile, but there was a weight in his tone, a calculation. "We need help. Significant help." I blinked. What kind of help? Sabrina didn't miss a beat. She reached for my hand, her long fingers resting gently atop mine, cool and impersonal. "Your house," she said. "In this market, it's worth at least $480,000, maybe more. We did some research. If you sold it, you could move into Sunnybrook. Lovely place, great community, and use the rest to help us start our married life right." She said it so casually, like she was asking me to hand over a sweater or lend them my car for a weekend. I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Had this woman, this person, who had only been in my life for 2 years, tops, just asked me to sell the home Henry and I built, to leave the place where I'd kept my marriage alive, raised my son, buried my husband's ashes beneath the maple tree in the yard? "No," I said softly, pulling my hand away. "I'm not selling my home." The silence that followed was colder than the expensive champagne they had ordered. Graham's face changed immediately, his jaw tightening, his brows pulling together into that disappointed expression he'd used as a teenager when I refused to let him skip class. "This is exactly what I meant," he muttered to Sabrina, shaking his head. "She's always been like this, sentimental, difficult, stuck in the past." I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came. It wasn't the insult that stunned me. It was the ease with which he'd tossed it at me, as if I were an obstacle to be managed instead of a mother who had spent decades sacrificing everything for his future. Sabrina leaned back, her tone cooler now. We just want you to be comfortable, Marion. Sunnybrook has a lovely garden, weekly activities, bridge nights, even water aerobics. You'd have people your age to talk to instead of rattling around that dusty house alone. My breath caught. In that moment, something inside me shattered. They had planned this. This wasn't a conversation. It was a presentation. They had rehearsed it, probably over wine, laughing about how to pitch the idea to me like a business deal. They had already reduced my home to numbers, my history to a real estate transaction, my life to an inconvenience that needed to be cleaned up before their big day. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not in front of her. I maintain my home just fine, I said, my voice tight with rage and grief. And I'm not ready to be placed in a retirement facility like an old sweater no one wants to wear anymore. Graham exhaled like I was being ridiculous. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I paid for the meal, every cent. They left me at the table in silence, walking away without a hug, without a goodbye. Just the echo of Graham's last words trailing behind him like smoke. Either help us start our lives properly, or don't expect to be part of it at all. The morning of the wedding began with silence, a cruel, aching silence that settled over my house like fog. The sun rose slowly over Maple Street, casting gold across the curtains Henry had hung 25 years ago. But even the light felt dimmed, heavy with dread. I had barely slept. My body moved on muscle memory as I brewed a pot of tea I couldn't stomach and laid out a dove-gray dress I had chosen not to celebrate, but to bear quiet witness from the shadows. I wasn't invited. My name had been crossed out in ink, after all. But I still planned to go. Not to cause a scene, not to interfere, but because I could not let my only child cross into his future, thinking I had abandoned him completely. I had made peace with the idea of sitting in the back, unnoticed, unseen. Just a mother holding space for a son who no longer remembered who she was. At 8:29 a.m., just as I reached for my keys, the phone rang. I froze. No one called this early. Not on a Saturday, not anymore. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver, my heart already thudding with unease. Hello? I said, voice cautious. A pause, then a voice, young, female, and cracking with emotion, spoke through the line. Is this Marion Whitlow? Yes, I answered, my stomach tightening. Who's calling? My name is Rebecca Lane, she said quickly. You don't know me, but I was Sabrina Vale's roommate. I lived with her for 2 years, and I think there's something you need to know. About her, about the wedding, about your son. Time seemed to stop. I sat down slowly, the phone cord tangling around my fingers. I'm listening, I said quietly, already bracing for a blow I couldn't yet name. Rebecca's voice shook. Sabrina, she's not who she says she is. I know today is the wedding, and I know this is probably the worst possible time, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't let it happen again. What do you mean? I asked, the fear already clawing its way up my throat. She's done this before, Rebecca said. Twice, maybe more. She finds men from successful backgrounds, but with families who have assets, parents who own homes, parents like you. Then she pressures them into extravagant weddings, pushes for financial help from their families, isolates them from anyone who questions her motives. And when the money's in place, when everything's been signed, transferred, committed, she pulls out, every time. I stared ahead, unblinking. Are you saying she's a con artist? Number not, in the legal sense, Rebecca said. But morally, absolutely. She's manipulative, calculated, and vicious when she's cornered. I didn't see it at first. She's charming, impressive. But when I confronted her about what she did to her last fiancé, Daniel, she made my life hell. She spread rumors, got me fired, forced me to leave town. My mouth had gone dry. Why are you calling me now? Rebecca's voice cracked. Because last night she called me, drunk, laughing. She said, she paused, then pushed on. She said, and I quote, another sentimental old woman with a house I'll liquidate. Honestly, I don't even have to try. Graham's so desperate to be accepted, he'd sell her out with a smile. They always do. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My hands clenched so tightly the receiver creaked in protest. Oh, God, I whispered. There's more, Rebecca said softly. She lost her job 3 months ago. She's in massive debt. Credit cards, gambling. I have documents. Screenshots, audio recordings, old contracts from her last engagements. I sent them to your email. I hope it's still the same one you used with the nursing board alumni directory. You need to stop this wedding, Mrs. Whitlow. She doesn't love your son. She's using him. She's already making plans to gut what's left of his finances after the ceremony. Please, believe me. I was frozen in my chair, paralyzed. The kitchen, the home I had fought to keep, blurred at the edges. Everything inside me screamed to run, to fight, to protect. But how? How does a mother save her son from a future built on deception when he's already shut the door in her face? Thank you for telling me, I whispered, gripping the phone like it was the last real thing in the world. Please, send me everything. As I hung up, I felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out the last of my strength. My hands moved on instinct, powering on my dusty old computer, watching the inbox refresh. I could hear Beatrice's car pulling into the driveway, ready to take me to a wedding I could no longer simply witness. Because now, I knew. Now I carried a terrible truth, a weapon I never wanted but had no choice but to wield. My son was walking into a trap, and I was the only one left who could pull him out. The papers shook in my hands as the printer whirred to life, each page sliding out like a piece of evidence in a case I never asked to prosecute. The audio file from Rebecca's call had already drained the blood from my face. Sabrina's voice, slurred with arrogance, laughing about how easy it had been to pit my son against me. He's so eager to impress me, I barely have to nudge him. Another sentimental old bat with a house I'll be sipping champagne off by spring. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I printed every damning screenshot, every contract, every message Rebecca had sent. And when I opened the door for Beatrice moments later, I was no longer just a mother hoping to witness her son's wedding. I was a mother on the brink of war. Beatrice took one look at me, her brows pinching in concern. Ellie, you're white as a sheet. What happened? She's done this before, I choked out. To other families? She's ruined them, Beatrice. She's ruined sons like mine. I barely remember the car ride. The city blurred around us, the world passing in streaks of spring green and blinding sunlight while my stomach churned with a dread I couldn't silence. Beatrice drove like a woman possessed, barely speaking, her jaw clenched as I recounted everything I'd learned. At one red light, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. Ashen, brittle, the pearls at my neck trembling with the pulse pounding beneath my skin. How had it come to this? How had I become the woman desperate to stop her son's wedding, racing through traffic with a folder full of digital blood? How had I gone from being the mother who made pancake breakfasts to the last defense line against a woman plotting to devour my son's life from the inside out? When Oakmere Estate came into view, its grand columns and manicured grounds felt like the set of a dream I'd once had, but now twisted into a nightmare. White chairs were already filling up on the lawn, the floral arch glowing beneath a perfect sky. Somewhere inside that pristine chaos, my son stood, seconds from being bound to someone who viewed him as a transaction. There was no time, no more softness, no more waiting for him to come to his senses. If I didn't act now, I would lose him entirely, to a marriage, to a lie, to a future where I'd be written out like I never existed. We parked at the far end of the lot, away from the arriving guests. Beatrice gripped my arm and whispered, "Service entrance." There's always a back way in. We find him. We don't ask permission. Every step toward the rear of the building felt like trespassing into a life that was no longer mine. I clutched the folder tight to my chest, my legs trembling beneath me. We slipped through the service hallway unnoticed, past caterers balancing champagne flutes and floral staff adjusting arrangements worth more than my monthly pension. At the staircase, a young server, flustered and overworked, barely looked up when Beatrice barked, "We've got a message for the groom. Miss Vale sent us." "The suite's second floor, east wing," he muttered. "They're heading down soon, so you'd better hurry." We found the groomsman's suite by instinct. Male laughter spilled into the hallway, carefree and unaware. I hesitated at the door. What if he didn't believe me? What if this was the moment he chose Sabrina over me once and for all? My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. Then I knocked. It was Andy, his best man, who opened the door, his smile fading the instant he saw me. "Mrs. Whitlow? What are you doing here?" "Please," I said, my voice a rasp. "I need to speak to Graham. It's urgent." He hesitated, looking over his shoulder. He said not to. "It's about Sabrina," I interrupted, and his face changed. Just slightly. A flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, gave me the courage to go on. "Please, I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm here to stop something that never should have begun." Before Andy could reply, the door opened wider, and there he was, Graham. My boy. My beautiful, distant son, in a tuxedo that made him look like a stranger. He stared at me like I was an intruder. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice wasn't angry, it was cold. Detached. Like he'd already rehearsed the speech in his mind. "I know," I said softly, "but you need to hear what I've brought. Please, 5 minutes. Then I'll leave." "No," he snapped. "You don't get to crash my wedding to make this about you. I'm not here to make it about me. I'm here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life." He started to turn away, but Beatrice stepped forward, her voice firm. "She has proof, Graham, about Sabrina, about what she's done to other men, other families." He froze, and I saw it then, that flash of fear behind his anger, the part of him that still remembered who I was, who I had been, the woman who had never lied to him, never left him, never wanted anything but his happiness. "5 minutes," he said finally, tight-lipped. "And then you're gone." As we followed him down a side hallway toward a quiet sitting room, my heart raced with a terrible blend of hope and horror. This was my only chance. I had 5 minutes to pull my son from the edge of a cliff he didn't even know he was standing on. And if I failed, I would lose him forever. The moment I placed the folder in Graham's hands, I felt like I was handing him a ticking bomb. The small sitting room just off the groom's suite felt suffocatingly still, like the eye of a hurricane. Outside, wedding bells were minutes from ringing. Inside, I watched the man I had raised, my son, my only child, flip through the evidence that could unravel everything he thought was true. Each page turned like a slap, messages between Sabrina and Rebecca, mocking Graham's devotion. Wedding contracts from previous engagements that never happened. Financial records showing Sabrina's dismissal from her firm and mountains of hidden debt. And then came the final blow, the transcript of the voicemail. Her words, "Another sentimental old bat," echoed off the walls of the room as Beatrice played the recording from her phone. Sabrina's voice was unmistakable, cruel and calculated, weaving a tapestry of manipulation and contempt. I watched Graham's face change in real time, pride twisting into confusion, then disbelief, then horror. And still, a part of me died, because I knew I was breaking something sacred inside him to try to save something even more fragile. His future. At first, he tried to reject it. "This could be fake," he muttered, voice hoarse. "She's not." But the conviction in his voice was already fraying. The papers shook in his trembling hands, his breath coming faster, uneven. "She told me she loved me. She said my mother was the one standing in our way." He looked up, and his eyes, once bright with ambition and certainty, now looked hollow, like a man realizing the ground beneath his feet had never been solid. "Why?" he whispered. "Why me?" "Because you're kind," I said gently, even as my heart splintered. "Because you trusted her. Because you wanted love so badly, you were willing to sell your soul to keep it." The knock on the door was sharp, urgent. Andy's voice followed. "Graham, they're ready. Everyone's seated. The officiant says we're behind schedule." Graham sat frozen. I could see it, the war within him, the need to maintain appearances warring with the truth now searing through his chest. Slowly, He stood. I have to see her. I have to ask her myself. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to scream that no confrontation would give him the closure he was about to throw himself into. But I saw the need in his eyes. The need to see if she would lie one last time. We followed him through the halls of Oakmere, past murmuring guests and soft classical music, toward a small antechamber beside the garden altar. There, standing in radiant white beneath a floral arch that had cost more than my yearly income, was Sabrina. She turned as Graham approached, her expression softening with rehearsed affection. "Darling," she purred. "You're late. I was starting to—" "Don't," Graham said, his voice low but sharp. "Don't say a word until I ask you something." The smile froze on her face. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. She blinked once, calculating. "Did you know about Sunnybrook before you met my mother? Did you tell Rebecca I was just another target?" Now she looked cornered. "Graham, what are you talking about?" He pulled the papers from his pocket, unfolded them slowly, and showed her the evidence. Her face changed in stages. Confusion, panic, and then something far more terrifying. Indifference. "So what?" she snapped. "Are we really going to do this now?" "What would you have done?" he asked, voice shaking. "After the wedding? After the accounts were merged? After the house was gone?" Sabrina's expression crumpled into something monstrous. "You think you're so special?" she hissed. "You're not. You're just another small-town boy trying to look like someone. Without me, you're nothing." The air around us shattered. Her voice, once dripping with sweetness, now tore through the garden corridor like a blade. Guests began to murmur. Staff froze mid-step. And then she did the unthinkable, grabbed a crystal vase from a table and hurled it at the wall beside Graham's head. The crash rang out like a gunshot. Gasps echoed through the hall as petals scattered like shrapnel. "I gave you a life!" she screamed. "And you threw it away for that withered old woman who still thinks pancakes and porch swings make a home." She stormed past me, nearly knocking me over, the train of her gown dragging behind her like a white flag of surrender soaked in venom. I stood still, not triumphant, just hollow. My son, my bright, hopeful son, remained rooted to the spot, surrounded by shards of cut glass and guests staring like spectators at a burning house. He turned slowly, and I saw the tears on his face. "I would have married her," he said, barely audible. "I would have given her everything." I stepped toward him, aching to touch him, but afraid he would pull away. "But you didn't," I said. "You stopped it." He didn't answer, just looked out at the altar that would now never hold their vows. The flowers, the guests, the perfect sky, none of it mattered anymore. All that remained was wreckage, and a silence so loud it threatened to swallow us both. That night, after the chaos had ebbed and the last of the stunned guests had gone, my house was filled not with celebration or relief, but with silence so thick it felt like grief incarnate. Graham stood in the entryway of the home he once knew, still dressed in the torn remnants of a wedding that never happened. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, his dress shoes scuffed from pacing the garden path in circles of disbelief. He looked like someone who'd just crawled out of a wreckage, and in a way, he had. The only sound was the tick of the old kitchen clock, each second a cruel reminder that everything had changed, and yet the world had gone on turning without pause. He didn't speak. He just stared at the familiar surroundings, at the dent in the wall from his teenage soccer ball, at the bookshelf he and Henry had built together, at the height markings on the doorframe, still visible despite time and paint. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was nearly a whisper. "I don't even know who I was going to become with her." I swallowed hard, my hands curled around a chipped mug of untouched tea. "Someone who wouldn't have survived long, I think." He gave a short, bitter laugh and dropped onto the old couch like his bones couldn't hold him up anymore. She lied to me for almost 2 years, Mom. Every smile, every kiss. She didn't love me. She wanted what I could give her. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. And I let her. I was so desperate to prove something. To her, to the world, to myself. I traded everything for the illusion of being enough. His voice cracked. I nearly gave away your home. There it was, that unbearable mixture of guilt and recognition. And suddenly, all I could feel was a heaviness in my chest, a sorrow so vast it defied words. You were enough, Graham. You always were. But she made you believe otherwise. That's what people like her do. But I believed her, he said, and now his voice was breaking too. And I believed her because I didn't want to believe you. 1,000 wounds reopened at once. My rejection from his life. The dinner where he let her ask for my home like it was a piece of furniture. The letter with my name crossed out in angry black ink. I had held it all inside, let it rot quietly in the corners of my heart, thinking that maybe love meant swallowing pain without complaint. But now, seeing my son unravel in the place that had once been his sanctuary, I understood that silence wasn't strength, it was surrender. I hated you for that letter, I confessed quietly, for crossing out my name, for treating me like I didn't matter. But what hurt more wasn't the exclusion. It was that I truly thought you'd forgotten who I was, what we had, what I gave up for you. My throat tightened, and I looked away. There were nights I sat in that garden alone, begging your father to give me a sign, to tell me what I'd done so wrong that our son could erase me. Graham's eyes filled with tears, and when he looked at me, it wasn't the man who had posed for glossy engagement photos or shaken hands with investors. It was my boy, the one who'd once cried when his goldfish died and climbed into bed with me after nightmares. I didn't forget, he whispered. I ignored it. I buried it. Because if I remembered how much you loved me, I'd have to admit how far I'd fallen. We sat in silence, the kind that stretches long and raw between two people trying to close a wound too wide to stitch. Then, softly, he said, they asked me to take a leave from the firm. Sabrina's father pulled strings. My projects were reassigned within hours. Emails have gone out. The narrative is already spinning. Her being the gracious bride abandoned by a mentally unstable groom. Rage flickered in my chest. They're protecting her? She's got money, influence. She's already spreading stories. That I'm volatile, erratic, that you brainwashed me. Of course she is, I muttered, the disgust in my stomach rising like bile. That's what abusers do when their mask slips. They rewrite the story before anyone else can tell the truth. Graham nodded, eyes hollow. I might lose everything. No, I said firmly, rising to sit beside him. You already lost what didn't matter, and now you get to decide what you rebuild. This, I gestured around us, to the home that had waited patiently for his return, isn't gone. I'm not gone. He leaned into me like he hadn't in years, his head resting against my shoulder, his body trembling with grief he had no words for. I don't know where to start. Then start here, I whispered, stroking his hair like I used to when storms frightened him. Start with being honest. Start with healing. Start with me. And for the first time in years, my son let me hold him. Not as a rescuer, not as a witness, but as a mother. And that, even amid the ruins, was the beginning of something sacred. The porch swing creaked softly beneath us, a familiar rhythm in a world that now felt unfamiliar in every other way. The sky was the color of watered-down slate, and the garden, once Henry's masterpiece, seemed to sag under the weight of late spring's heat. Graham sat beside me, staring straight ahead, his hands clasped between his knees, as if he were afraid that if he let go, he'd shatter into pieces neither of us could put back together. It had been 4 days since the wedding that never happened, and the silence in our home had only grown louder. Not a silence born from peace, but from exhaustion, like the kind that settles over a battlefield when the last scream fades and only the wounded remain. I glanced at him, this grown man beside me who used to build towers out of blocks on the living room rug. His jaw was tight, unshaven. His eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He hadn't touched his phone in 2 days, not after reading the headline in the society column. Architect's breakdown stuns guests. Bride left devastated by last-minute collapse. Not after seeing the avalanche of comments painting him as unstable, spoiled, possibly medicated. Sabrina had worked quickly, ruthlessly, and every word she'd fed to reporters was a carefully crafted knife aimed straight at his character. There were emails to clients implying substance abuse, notes to colleagues asking for prayers during his crisis, even staged photos of her looking somber beside empty wine glasses. She didn't just walk away from the wedding. She burned every bridge behind her and handed Graham the ashes with a smile. "I thought I'd feel free," he finally said, his voice brittle as old glass. "I thought that once she was gone, I'd feel like I'd escape. But I don't. I feel hollow. Filthy. Like she still has her hands inside my life, twisting everything. And I let her. God, I let her." I reached out and rested a hand over his. He flinched at first, then let it remain. "You didn't let her? You loved her? That's not the same." He shook his head. Number I needed her. Needed what she represented. I wanted to feel chosen, seen, elevated, like I mattered in a world I'd never felt part of. He swallowed hard. "I watched her manipulate other people, Mom. I saw little flashes, her twisting words, her subtle digs, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. Because if I wasn't, then I was just weak, pathetic." "No," I said quietly, the anger sharp in my throat now, not just at Sabrina, but at the sickness she'd left behind. "You were human, vulnerable, and she preyed on that. There's nothing pathetic about being deceived by someone you trusted. The shame isn't yours." He didn't respond, but I could feel the heat building in him, grief turning to rage, confusion curdling into something more corrosive. "She said I was nothing without her, that no one would want me once she was gone, that I'd be a joke, pitied by my clients, dropped by my firm, exiled from her world of polished lies and designer masks." His jaw clenched. "And maybe she's right." I turned to him fully now. "Listen to me. That woman doesn't get to define you. Not with her cruelty, not with her narrative, not with her money. She's a parasite, Graham. She latches on and drains the life from people who shine too brightly for her to stand on her own. You were never small. She just needed to make you feel that way so she could feel big." "But now what?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of everything he hadn't yet said. "Now I've lost my job, my reputation, my dignity, and I've hurt the only person who's ever really been in my corner." His eyes filled, and for the first time since he'd come home, he didn't look like a man building walls. He looked like a boy begging for a map. "How do I fix this? How do I fix me?" I exhaled slowly, blinking back tears that had lived just beneath the surface for days. "You start by sitting here, with me, letting the swing carry the weight for a while. You start by not pretending you're okay, and you keep breathing, even when it hurts." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the wind chimes Henry had hung years ago. Their soft, dissonant song carried through the quiet, a ghostly comfort. "She tried to erase me," I said, surprising myself. "Crossed my name off a wedding invitation like I was a stain, and for a moment, I believed her. That I didn't matter, that I was old and inconvenient, something to be traded for silk chairs and 5-course dinners. But you came back, and you let me hold the pieces." Graham looked at me then, really looked, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't just pain, it was recognition. "You never stopped loving me. Not for a second." The swing rocked gently beneath us. The world hadn't forgiven. The whispers hadn't stopped. The firm hadn't called back. But for now, in this quiet pocket of the storm's aftermath, I had my son beside me. And even though we were both cracked open, we were here, still breathing, still together. This story holds a profound reminder for anyone, especially those in their later years, that love, even when given freely and sacrificially, can sometimes be betrayed. But betrayal does not define us. How we respond to it does. Marion's journey reminds us that strength often lives in quiet acts, in choosing not to retaliate, in holding space for a lost child, in stepping forward with truth even when your heart is shattered. It teaches that while we cannot protect our loved ones from every deception, we can still be their safe harbor when the storm clears. The story also gently warns that appearances can deceive, and that true worth is not found in status, wealth, or social standing, but in character, loyalty, and the integrity with which we live. For the elderly, who may sometimes feel sidelined or undervalued, Marion's voice affirms that age brings not irrelevance, but wisdom, the kind that saves lives, rebuilds bridges, and heals even long-broken bonds. In the end, it is not the grand gestures or public honors that matter most, but the steadfast love that waits quietly on a porch swing, ready to welcome someone home.